When I was a young girl, living deep within the Appalachian hollers, my evenings were often spent perched on the splintered wooden steps of my grandma's porch. It began on an evening much like any other, with the crickets serenading the coming night and the scent of pine heavy in the air. Grandma would start in on one of her old stories of her childhood. Some she told would chill me to the bone. One tale that she swore was the God honest truth passed down from her grandpappy to her and now to me, a warning to never be ignored. Her story began as her a young girl herself then, wild hearted and untamed, and her feet bare and stained with the red clay of the holler. She knew well the one rule that her own mamma had etched into her little soul: never go into those woods that stretch beyond our land. But children are drawn to the forbidden, and the tree line was a siren call that whispered of adventure and mystery. Never be in the woods from dusk till dawn. Never leave the marked trail. It's marked for a reason. And if you hear voices close to you, they're far away. And if you hear voices far away, then they're near. Do not whistle or sing in the woods, and never look too hard into the trees. In the Appalachian folklore, there are creatures who wear the faces of others. Nobody knows what happens if you follow them. Grandma had been playing out back on the property down by the tree line, right here on this very property one evening, when she said she saw her cousin standing in the pasture. He just stood there at the tree line, just staring, but completely silent. She thought it was odd that he was quiet, since he was a loudmouth teenage boy, and so she waved at him. He took off down the hill into the woods, gesturing for her to follow him, and she did. And as she followed, the air around her grew colder, and the sounds of the forest, they became muffled, as if she was moving underwater. The sunlight filtering through the dense canopy grew dimmer, casting long, menacing shadows that seemed to move on their own accord. The further she ventured, the more she realized the eerie silence was not complete. Whispers floated on the air, unintelligible and somehow both distant and alarmingly close. She remembered her own granny's warnings too late. She was already deep into the woods. The figure of her cousin, which seemed so clear at the pasture's edge, became increasingly indistinct, flickering between the trees like a mirage. It was unnaturally quiet, the silence oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. She called out for her cousin, her voice sounding alien in the hush. There was no reply, only the rustle of leaves as a chill wind swept through the clearing. Panic soon set in, and she realized she didn't know which way she had come. It was then that she heard the voices again, clear now, but still impossible to understand. They seemed to be coming from all around her, and yet when she spun around, there was no one there. As the sun went down and the twilight took hold, she saw them, figures at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the fading light. They were human in shape, but wrong in every other way. Their silhouettes distorted. Limbs were too long and movements were jerky, as if they were struggling against the very air that they moved through. And their faces were blank, smooth as stone, and featureless except when, for a fleeting moment, they would flicker and display the visage of someone she knew, be it a neighbor or a friend from school, her cousin. Each glimpse was a twisted mockery, a stolen identity worn like a mask. She realized then the truth of her granny's warning and the chilling reality of the creatures who wore the faces of others. They were stolen. The lost ones who had wandered too deep and been claimed by the forest. The realization struck her with such force that she stumbled backward, her heart pounding in a frantic rhythm. But before she could turn to flee, the ground beneath her seemed to shift, roots and vines snaking out to grasp at her ankles, pulling her down. She screamed, fighting against the living tendrils, but they were relentless. And just as she felt her strength waning, a clear voice cut through the night. Her granny's voice, chanting words in an old tongue she didn't understand. The vines recoiled as if struck, retreating back into the earth. She then heard a gunshot, looked up to see her mama at the edge of the clearing, a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "Never forget," her mama said, her voice stern but tinged with relief. "The woods are old, filled with secrets and beings we cannot fathom. For those who walk those Appalachian trails, heed the warnings passed down through generations. Respect the forest. And remember, never be in the woods from dusk till dawn. And never leave the marked trails, they're marked for a reason. And never, ever look too hard in through those trees."